It was a long and terrible battle. From the side there was a huge amount of flame and particles of ash rose up. There were a lot of dead people lying on the ground, and weapons were stuck in the ground. After that, we see the knight's bloody helmet lying on the ground, after which it is flattened by someone's huge foot. It was a monster with the eyes of a predator. After that, he started shouting loudly, showing his teeth. People were standing in a crowd and were very scared. They watched as 3 such monsters stood in front of them. The knights were standing and covered in blue blood. One of the knights realized that something was about to happen, after which the enraged monsters rushed to the people, but the people also rushed to them holding their flags. Humans and monsters clashed in a terrifying battle between each other. This event was called the Cavalry War, and more than 30 years have passed since its moment. After that, we are transported to a place where there was a huge castle on the ground, and under it there was a moat with a river. In the castle was the wise Empress Hyler Rose. She had blue eyes and long blonde hair. She was wearing a luxurious dress with ornaments. Hyler Rose was completely off the rails. After that, we see 2 knights carrying a body that left a huge trail of blood behind it. Dark clouds enveloped the Kyle Empire, which had previously flourished and had 5 centuries of great history. The knight's bloodied body was lifted up. Behind the guy who was picked up by the knights, there was a long corridor where everything was covered in blood, and at the edges lay the corpses of people who were all accused of vile treachery and were eventually executed. Only those who were able to please the crazy empress with their mawkish speeches were able to stay alive. Suddenly, a door opened, and a bright white light shone through it. Across from this door sat a princess in a sumptuous hall, with knights standing by and pointing their swords at the floor. A hooded man, covered in blood, was led into the hall. The man was barely breathing. He raised his head to the side, and the princess, in turn, continued to sit impassively and watch this, along with the other knight. The guy continued to stare, after which the princess called out to him. She said that Yuma forced Mal and Zack to commit high treason. She asked if Yuma would admit his guilt. Yuma raised his head with a blank look and said that it was absolutely true. Yuma pointed his head to the floor and said that the princess' voice was shaking. She, in turn, looked at him with displeasure. Yuma said that he was just a eunuch. He said that he had no family name, no power, and nothing else, unlike other aristocrats. He quietly asked the princess if she was really afraid. After this sentence, the bald man standing next to the princess couldn't stand it any longer, and said that such a pathetic traitor didn't dare to say anything towards Her Majesty. Hyler Rose calmly raised her hand and told him to keep his displeasure to himself. She looked towards Yuma with a smirk and said that was all she wanted to hear, then she ordered Yuma to be beheaded. Yuma calmly closed his eyes and realized that his end had come. Yuma realized that if he died anyway, he would at least try his luck one last time. After which, she took out a glowing ball. This ball was the fruit of rebirth, and if one ate it, one would be able to return it to the past. Yuma didn't know how many years he could get a human back, but it was still better than nothing. Yuma said it would be all by chance. Yuma remembers how a grandfather gave him this fruit and said that after he ate it, it would immediately die. He asked why he had given him the poison. Grandfather ironically said that he was just giving Tom a chance to look at his dried up pussy again. Yuma got angry and said he was a devil, but Grandpa kept laughing. While in the throne room, where the knights and Yuma were standing, he puts this fruit in his mouth. Yuma didn't understand what had happened to Her Majesty. After all, she used to be very smart. He was wondering what made her change so much. He remembers how she used to be very kind. Yuma continued to sit in front of Hale, then swallowed the fruit. He called out to Her Majesty and asked her to stay well. After that, he started to feel that something strange was happening to him. His eyes turned red and he started coughing up blood. The princess was shocked by this and stood up, but the knight standing next to her just held out his hand in front of her. Yuma's eyes started to gradually close, and he only managed to say that he would be back soon. Then he dropped dead. After that, we see dark shades and then bright light. The sunlight fell on a guy with blonde hair and blue eyes. After that, he abruptly opened his eyes and stood up. He was lying on the grass and didn't understand what was going on. He realized that he was in Parola, the birthplace of Yuma. He looked around at the houses that were located next to the pond. The guy looked back and saw a vat of water. He picked it up and looked at himself in the reflection of the water. Yuma looked at his reflection and was shocked that he actually went back 40 years to his past. Yuma said that he perfectly remembers what happened 40 years ago. Yuma started moving through the forest and saw a guy lying under a tree with a white cat. It was Haka. Yuma called out to him and said Malin was behaving badly again. Haka sighed in frustration and asked who he had beaten this time. Yuma said that he beat up the owner of the fish shop cage. Yuma stood up and said with a smile that it was because he had spoken badly of Haki. Yuma asked him not to scold him too much. Haka got up from the grass and asked where Malin was. Yuma guessed that he was probably napping on the beach. Then they went to the beach. They reached the beach and Haka spotted Malin. Malin lay on the sand in the bright sun and the sound of the water. Yuma watched as Haka walked up to him and slapped him across the face. He took the man by the ear and began to rub him. Malin had long hair and brown eyes. Haka said he had told Tom many times not to fight with the residents. Malin screamed that he was in pain. Yuma said that Haka was the person who took his orphan into his care. Yuma came to his senses and realized that his cock was also back and stood up, proudly shining his dignity through his pants. Yuma stood in front of the water and was glad that he could see them all again. Yuma said that it was all very good. But now is not the time for rejoicing, because soon the whole world will plunge into war and everything that Yuma loved so much will simply be destroyed. After that, we are transported to the dark place where Yuma kept the pieces and put them together. On these fragments were memories of the war. Yuma sat alone and collected it all. Yuma said it would be different this time. Yuma started up the light steps to the throne and said that if he needed it so badly, he would take the highest position. Yuma recalled all the people who were there then and said that he would do anything to protect those who are so dear to him. After that, he raised his hand and grabbed the bright feather. Yuma happily looked at his dignity and said that he would protect it first. Yuma clutched his face and said that he remembered perfectly well the day he lost it, and he didn't want to repeat it. Yuma recalls how a knight named Miro made him a eunuch. Yuma said that this knight is also called the immortal Miro. Yuma said that the secret to Miro's immortality was a long tongue that penetrated deep into the assholes of people who were profitable to him. Yuma recalled that before his rebirth, Miro returned to the city around this time. He told him that he liked to feel like a superior while he watched their sword training sessions. Yuma remembers Miro telling them with a malicious smile that if they beat him, he would write a letter of recommendation to the Order of Knights. Yuma and Malin couldn't ignore this possibility, and they certainly agreed. Yuma recalled how he and Malin were all overjoyed, looking forward to fighting a real knight. Yuma recalled how he stood over them and looked very menacing, holding a wooden sword in his hands. Yuma had said that they were afraid of him, but that didn't change the fact that he was a much worse swordsman than he was with his foul tongue. Yuma and Malin easily defeated him. Miro held a grudge against them afterwards. The battered Miro leaving said that he would write them letters of recommendation as promised. But he wrote them recommendations for something more appropriate than knight's orders, Miro said. Yuma said that after his recommendations, he became a eunuch, and Malin in turn became Miro's disciple. Yuma said that because he was a eunuch, he could get whatever he wanted. Yuma could get power, the Empress's favor, money. But Yuma didn't understand the point of it all. He didn't need it after being crippled. Yuma recalled how all the people discussed him and avoided him. He described how he had to put up with the contempt of the aristocrats and even the commoners. Because of this, Yuma always kept to himself and wore a dark robe. Yuki thought it over and said that he would never do it again. This time, Yuma decided to do everything to protect himself from this. Yuma knew that Miro would arrive at his village the next morning, so Yuma decided to let him meet Malin first. Otherwise, history will repeat itself again, and Malin is highly likely to win. Yuma sat there and thought about what he could do about it. Yuma realized that they needed to do something to prevent their meeting. While Yuma was thinking about what he could do, Malin came into the room and said that a knight was coming to the fish shop tomorrow. Malin suggested we go and see it. Yuma immediately knew that things were bad. Malin, beaming with joy, offered to become his apprentice. Malin said that the knight could even write them letters of recommendation if they trained hard. Yuma stood up, patting Malin on the back and telling him not to distract him, since the knight was coming here to rest, not train. Malin punched Yuma in the stomach in a friendly way and said that he didn't understand the whole situation, because such chances don't just lie on the ground, and you have to grab what you have. Yuma responded by jumping towards Malin and kicking him. Yuma said that Mr. Haka's lessons were enough for them. Malin took Yuma from behind and threw him into a deflection, and said that their father taught them nothing but the useless basics of close combat. Yuma smiled and said that then he would show Malin who was in charge. He told him to do as he said, and then they both swung to hit each other. Malin told him to show what he could do and called Yuma a dog. After that, Yuma stepped on Malin's body, which was lying on the ground, and asked him to name who he thought was the dog again. Yuma told Malin to obey him from now on. Yuma wiped the sweat from his face and was satisfied that the first point of his plan had been completed. After that, we hear someone say that he threw it right on the ground. It was Miro who was pulling his mustache and saying that he was able to win because he was ready to die. Miro constantly wore silver armor and had pink hair. Miro said that even though he had to accept death, it was his duty as a knight and there was nothing to be surprised about. This was all Malin, who had been drugged by Miro's rotten tongue, was listening to. Malin told Tom it was unbelievable. Miro said that he just adores kids, and he also added that Cage did not praise the local youth so much for nothing. Yuma sat at the same table and was unhappy with the whole situation. Miro said that he had heard that Yuma and Malin were studying swordsmanship. Miro suggested that they show what they could learn. Maro was immediately very happy with this situation and said that it would be an honor for them. Yuma knew that if Malin won now, his Excalibur would be cut off again. Yuma realized that he had to stop him from defeating Miro at all costs. Malin took out his wooden sword and took up a stance. Yuma came up behind Malin and told him not to get set up to win, as he had to lose at all costs. Malin was shocked by this. Malin smiled and said that he didn't even expect to win. He said he was just going to give it his all. Malin didn't know yet that Miro was very weak with a sword. Yuma said that he still has to lose even if he wants to win. Yuma said that if he didn't lose to Miro, he was finished, and in his mind, Yuma said the same thing to his dignity. Malin continued to smile and asked if Yuma was overestimating him. Malin felt great about this upcoming duel. Yuma looked at him and said he was an idiot. Malin and Miro were standing up, and Haku and Yuma were watching. Miro shouted at Malin to attack. Miro said that now everyone will see what Malin has learned. Malin started running up to Miro and said that he would give it his all, after which he swung and threw a punch. Miro's sword fell out and flew up, then he fell to the ground. Malin's face was set. Yuma was standing at the back and already knew what the outcome would be. Miro was extremely unhappy about this. After that, Yuma realized what to do, and he started shouting. Yuma shouted that Malin was a coward. Yuma shouted that Yuma had attacked the knight by distracting him with his screams. Yuma said that Malin wasn't worthy to train with a great knight. Yuma hoped in his head that he wasn't overreacting too much, because if he did, Miro the pig might not buy it. Miro turned to Yuma with a smile and said that even though Yuma was right, cowardice could also be part of the battle strategy. Miro believed everything Yuma said. Yuma was secretly very glad that he was too stupid. Miro said that luck, cowardice, and even dirty tricks can one day save anyone's life. Miro said that as a thank you, he would show them real strength. Yuma was very surprised by this, because he didn't understand what a person like Miro could show. Miro, in his opinion, took and made a lunge with a sword. Malin just stood there and said nothing. Haka told Yuma that if he wasn't an aristocrat, he would have been lying in a ditch with a blade between his ribs long ago. Yuma stood there and confirmed it with a stony face. After that, Miro's sword shone with a blue light. He told them to see it, the aura of the sword. Yuma started smiling and clapping Miro and shouting that it was just amazing. Haku went up to Miro and thanked him for taking the time, as it was very important to them. Haku offered to buy Miro a beer after such a wonderful warm-up. Miro agreed, and he and Haku walked through the forest. Yuma watched and was pleased that Haka had taken Miro away. After that, they both started laughing out loud. Yuma picked up the wooden sword and after it all lit up with a bright glow. Yuma held it up and said it was a piece of cake. Yuma noticed that it took him about 5 minutes to get over it. Malin lay down on the grass and agreed with Yuma. Yuma said that Haka took the knight away so as not to put him in an awkward position. Yuma offered to stop by later, then lay down next to Malin. Yuma stretched out his hand in front of him, and in his mind, he was glad that he had succeeded. Yuma realized that the time flywheel was running and history was beginning to change. Yuma said that from now on, he would destroy anyone and everything who messed up his life. After that, we are transported to Miro, who was drinking beer. The girl came up and said that something was missing. Haka asked her what she meant. After that, the girl went to Miro and brought him fish, for which Miro thanked her. Malin and Yuma then walked through the city. Malin asked if they would stop by Miro's. Yuma told him to stop, so something was wrong. Yuma turned around and saw Haku sitting outside the window with Miro, and Miro was holding the girl's hand. Miro said the girl was just lovely and told her to sit down at the table. He started touching the girl's hand and started asking questions. Miro asked her how old she was and rubbed against her arm. The girl felt very uncomfortable and said that she had a lot of work to do. Miro wondered how she could have so much work to do if they were the only people in the bar. Yuma and Malin saw this and were very angry. Yuma thought that Miro was still an asshole. Miro said that the girl was trembling violently. Miro said what that war orphan should have been used to by now. Miro put his arm around the girl, who was feeling very uncomfortable, and said that he understood why Cage was using this girl. Haku sat with his head bowed. He knew perfectly well in his head that their empire had a clear hierarchical system. Haku knew that if he acted recklessly now, everyone around him would be in danger. Haku watched all this and apologized to Maria in his head. After that, the girl started to shed tears on her cheek. Her tear fell on the floor, and after that, a wooden sword hit the floor. The girl and Miro were surprised by this and looked in the direction where the impact was heard. It was Malin and Yuma. Malin asked Haku a question. Why was he just sitting there quietly watching Miro's crappy attitude? Miro looked at all this and with a grin told Haku that his son didn't seem to understand something. Malin didn't wait for an answer. Malin didn't understand why Miro was groping Maria and Haku wasn't doing anything about it. Drunk Miro looked in the direction of the boys and said that he thought they were good-natured, but they turned out to be just another rude person. Miro said that Haka should punish his worthless son for such behavior. Malin went to Miro and took out his sword. Malin said that the only one who needs to be punished here is Miro. After all this, Malin swung his wooden sword and was about to hit Miro right on the head. Haku started yelling at him to stop right away because he knew they were going to be in big trouble later. Malin said that if he doesn't do anything, then he will decide everything on his own. After that, Yuma came up behind Malin and pulled him down. Yuma said that Mr. Haka was absolutely right and then told Malin to stop. Yuma knew that if he killed Miro, the situation would get out of hand. Miro said that he was talking some nonsense because before that he was afraid to fight with him. After that, Miro was very surprised and an aura came from the boys. Yuma took out his sword and it completely glowed with white light, and the aura from this sword radiated throughout the room. Miro was extremely scared. He was shocked that he had such a strong aura. Miro said that Yuma would be beheaded if he dared to attack the knight. Yuma smiled and said that they would see which of them would lose their heads. Then he picked up his sword and was about to attack. A startled Haku jumped up from the table and ran towards Yuma. He asked him to stop immediately. Haku ran up to Yuma and threw a punch with his hand, but Yuma dodged and swung to make a punch. He hit Miro, who fell down and started screaming. Yuma's blow with the wooden sword was so strong that Miro in iron armor fell to the floor and flew towards the wall that he had destroyed. Yuma stood over the crying Miro, who said that he was in a lot of pain, and in fear, he called for mom and dad. Yuma looked at his sword and said that he had removed the aura before striking. Haku watched it all and was terrified. He was extremely displeased that Yuma had hit him. Yuma stood over Miro with a confident look and said that he was glad that he did it. Yuma said it made him feel a little better even though he would have to deal with the consequences. Yuma turned towards the people and told Maria to go to the Lord first. Yuma said that if she said that Miro had molested her, he would take Maria's side. Maria, who was crying, looked at all this and clenched her fist near her chest. Miro sat there and didn't know what to do. Yuma called out to Miro and started to stretch his fist since he wasn't done with it yet. Haku was standing in the back and didn't like what was about to happen, but Malin was standing there and was completely happy about it. A couple of minutes later, Miro was completely beaten up. Miro said that Yuma was finished and would be executed for attacking the knight. Miro said he would report everything to the guards. Haku and Malin stood and listened to what he was saying. Yuma just smiled and sat down to talk to Miro. Yuma said that the guards would be only too happy to know that the knight was beaten up by some pathetic commoner like him. Yuma said that they were already unhappy that someone of low birth couldn't become a knight in the service of the aristocrats. After that, Yuma said that Miro would probably be the one who the guards would take out their anger that they had accumulated over the years of service. Yuma continued to sit and escalate the situation by telling such things to Meroi. Yuma said that since they know how to use the sword aura, they would probably just let them go. Yuma put his hand on Miro's shoulder and said that all talented commoners are much more valuable than trash like him. Yuma started patting Miro on the the shoulder and asked him if he realized that he was just a pathetic and insignificant person. After that, he got close to Miro and told him to get out of his sight. After that, Miro immediately sobered up and started running away from this bar. Malin looked in Yuma's direction and said it was really cool, then gave him the thumbs up. Haku then slapped Malin on the back of the head. Haku went up to Yuma and told him that it was all worth refraining from. Malin was standing in the back and asked Haku if he was ready to give that Miro Maria. Malin said he was disappointed in Haku. Haku turned in Malin's direction, and his eyes were fiercely red. After that, Yuma intervened in their conversation. Yuma told Malin that Haku was right. Yuma said that if things went wrong, not only they would be in great danger, but Maria would also be in great danger. Haku said it wasn't all that bad. Haku said they needed to pack up their things to leave Peril. Yuma said it wasn't necessary, but then he said he had a plan. But to do this, it will be better for them to split up for a while. After that, we observe a huge castle. Suddenly someone approached the guards who were guarding the entrance. The guards asked me to introduce myself and state the reason why this person came here. Haku stood there in silence. Haku recalled Yuma telling them to go to the Lord to ask for his help, and if they were with Maria, they would both be safe. Haku said that he was in a situation where he couldn't do without the Lord's help. Haku wondered how Yuma knew that the Lord was a member of the faction supporting the commoner. Haku recalls that he asked Yuma what he would do. Yuma told him not to worry about him. Yuma said that he would head straight for the capital. Yuma said he knew the man. Haku apologized to Yuma and held out his sword. Haku told him to take it. Haku was embarrassed that he had placed such a heavy burden on Yuki's shoulders. Yuma put the sword on his back and went to the capital. Yuma reached the castle and was surprised that it was still the same. Yuma said that he worked in this castle for 40 years. Yuma stood at the foot of this castle and said that he was very happy to see this place again. Yuma said that Hyla Rose should be here too. Yuma remembers how in his previous life, as a eunuch, Hyla came up to him and called out to him. Hyla said that she would show him where he should go when he was about to escape from the palace, even if he had to leave because of her. Hale told him to run as fast as he could. Yuma smiled and said that he understood. Yuma said he wouldn't look back. Hale pointed to the brick and said that no one would ever find it here. Yuma went to that wall and pressed a brick, and it worked like a button. The doors began to open. After that, a space was formed at the bottom to get into the castle. Yuma climbed in and started crawling through the excavated cave. Yuma was exhausted enough while crawling along this path. Yuma said that he was doing all this in order to see the young empress at least once. Yuma wondered how many crimes he had already committed. Yuma sat down and began to think. Yuma counted an attempt, and the night, high treason, trespassing on the palace grounds. Yuma said that if they caught him, they wouldn't leave a single living place of him, so he had to be careful. Yuma came to the surface and started walking through the forest. Yuma smelled a familiar smell. Yuma recalled how Hyla liked to walk in the garden, so he hopes that he can at least get a look at her. Yuma climbed a hill and watched the castle from above, after which Yuma noticed a strange feeling. After that, a sword blade was presented to his throat. A dark figure stood behind Yuma and told him to identify himself. Yuma recalled that familiar voice from his previous life. Yuma must have realized that it was Baris. Baris was a knight who accompanied the imperial family. Baris noticed that Yuma decided to keep quiet and began to slowly cut his neck. Yuma could guess the reason Baris was here. Then someone called out to Baris. Another hooded figure approached from behind. The man took off his hood and a girl with red eyes and a dress appeared. This was the first Princess Zika Rose. She asked who he was. Yuma realized that he was a complete idiot and shouldn't have come here. Yuma knew that he had illegally entered the palace grounds in front of the first princess of the Imperial Knight. Yuma didn't understand why they were here. Yuma started to assume that they knew someone was coming here. Baris released Yuma and he introduced himself to them. They asked Yuma what he was doing here. Yuma said that he had some business to attend to in the palace. The princess laughed and asked Yuma what business such a ragamuffin might have in the palace. The princess noticed that Yuma did not enter through the main entrance, but through the passage from the side of the mountains, and she asked what Yuma wanted. Yuma revealed that when he was 7 years old, his parents were killed by a magical attack. Since he was also destined to die that day, a mage suddenly appeared and saved him in the village. Yuma said that there were rumors among the locals that this savior was an imperial magician, so he decided to come here to find him. Baris was standing over Yuma and said that he was too suspicious and the princess shouldn't talk to him. The princess stood and said that she did not allow Baris to speak. After that, Baris started bowing and begging for forgiveness. The princess then laughed and told Baris that it was just a joke. Sitsuka stood over Yuma and asked if he knew the name of the magician. Yuma said he had heard people call him Adeline Woods. Ritsuka thought about it and realized that considering that he was very calm, it was unlikely that he was lying. She told Yuma that she would pass on his words. However, she told Tom not to poke his nose in here anymore. She said that the penalty for entering the palace is death. After which, she went back to the forest. Yuma thanked her. Yuma was shocked from the fact that he barely made it to the capital and already almost died. Yuma knew that the first princess wasn't the type to turn a blind eye to such actions, so he was extremely lucky that everything went smoothly. Yuma said he needed to find a way to meet Adeline Woods. However, while Yuki was leaving this place, it seemed strange to him that within a year, Sitsuka Rose would go to attempt to coup d'etat, and the person who would kill her would be Baris. Yuma remarked that they must have a bad relationship between each other. Yuma didn't understand why they were together then, especially in a place like this. Yuma found this rather strange. Yuma came to the capital and realized that he needed to act more carefully and keep a low profile once again. Yuma decided to deal with Miro first. Yuma decided to take advantage of the Puana shopping community. Yuma said that Puan was known as a champion of the inhabitants and a moneylender, who was respected even by the nobles. Yuma said that the main income may seem to be the sale of fine furniture and other various valuables, but in reality, his income came from the magic stones that were brought from the Helgai kingdom. However, in recent years, Yuma has noticed that Pyun must develop a way to create magic stones on his own. After developing a monopoly on the production of magic stones, the Pyun merchant community will become the strongest. Yuma came to the Puana trading community and was met by guards. They asked him what he wanted here. Yuma said that he wanted to meet Pyun, and then Yuma asked to be called here. The guards started laughing because Yuma wanted to meet Pyun. They told Yuma not to joke like that anymore. While the guards were laughing, Yuma picked up his sword and was about to draw it. The guards exchanged glances between each other at this. Afterward, Yuma gravely said that if they laughed again, he would cut out their tongues. Yuma said that he was an escort for Adeline's family. Then he asked them again if they would call point or if he would have to go through on his own. After that, we observed the luxurious mansions of Pyun. Yuma was sitting across from a man who was wearing a suit. Pyun introduced himself to Yuma. Yuma thanked him for the warm welcome. Pyun told him to help himself to tea because it was a rare variety brought from the east. Yuma thanked him. Yuma knew that it would be the largest community in the future, and the head of this community will be a man who will be known as a ruthless muddlender. Pyun sipped his tea and was pleased with this amazing variety. Yuma was surprised that this person was the one who was currently sitting in front of him. Pyun looked like a kind and good person. He was wearing a suit with a red bow tie and a monocle on his face. Pyun said we should get down to business. Puna asked what Yuma's purpose was. Yuma said he wanted to make a deal with him. Yuma said that he knows how to create magic stones. Poin choked on his tea at the news. Yuma then said that he lied about being an escort for Adeline Wood's family. Yuma said that he was just an ordinary person. Pyun was shocked that he knew how to create magic stones and that Yuma was an ordinary person. Pyun started to wipe up the spilled tea and said that according to the Magic Academy, it was simply impossible. Pyun said he never thought he would hear such a thing. Yuma said that if he didn't believe them, they could sign a magic contract, and Yuma handed him a paper with a pen. Yuma said that if he broke this contract, then he would agree to become a research subject for magicians. Yuma continued to drink his tea calmly, and Pyun didn't understand what Yuma was trying to do. Yuma said that he almost killed a knight recently, and he would like Pyun to take care of it all. Pyun said that trying to kill a knight wasn't something that could be solved with money. Yuma jokingly told Pyun to go to the casino that Fabian owned, where people often hung out and played cards. Yuma told Pyun to find the noble knight of the gambling craze, Highwind Woods, there. Yuma said they would use it. After that, we see the golden luxury armor that was lying on the table. We see Pyun who was sitting at the same table with a blue-haired guy with a beard. This guy asked what Pyun wanted. Pyun said that he had heard rumors that Knight Miro had almost died at the hands of a commoner. The blue-haired man said he hated the name Miro. He said he had already heard the news. He said that this lustful Miro was beaten up by some village kid. Pyun said that the criminal who beat up Miro is named Yuma and he is his nephew. Pyun said that according to Baron Lewis, it seems that the reason why Yuma made such a mistake is because of Miro. The man told Pyun to stop. The man looked at the shining armor and said that he would raise the matter at the elders' meeting. The man said that he hoped that they would meet again soon, as people like him needed more things like this golden armor. Pyun thanked him and realized in his mind that everything had happened exactly as Yuma had said. Yuma told Pyun that he had done a great job, then told him to get down to the business of creating magic stones. Yuma said that the method is quite simple. He said that first you need to grind the magic stones into powder, after which he said that you need to add them to the ground like ordinary seeds, after they need to be watered with the blood of magical animals. Pyun asked if that was all. Yuma said yes, but when he gets to point 3, everything starts to explode. Pyun was shocked with such information. Yuma told him not to worry, because they would only need one archmage to protect such a field. Yuma said that we only need to find one archmage to protect us. Pyun was disappointed and said that there weren't many of them in the Empire. Yuma told him not to worry about it, since he had just the person they needed. After that, we are transported to the castle where Yuma was drinking tea. He said that even though Kale Fabian was adopted due to an outstanding talent, at the moment, he was just an outcast within the family and the entire high society. After that, we are transported to the ball, where there were a lot of people. Kale Fabian was drinking a drink and asked what was the matter. Pyun said it was an honor to meet the great archmage Kale Fabian. Pyun stood in front of him with a walking stick and a blue bird on his shoulder. He introduced himself to him. Kale was sitting at the food table and said that if Tom wanted the Fabian family's power, he had come to the wrong person. Prior to this meeting, Yuma had told Pyun that this was the way to start the conversation. Pyun said that the only person he wanted to discuss the case with was him. Pyun said he didn't want people who only cared about blood ties. Kale thought about it and then started laughing out loud. Kale started laughing and said that Pyun was just crazy. Pyun turned away and said to himself that he never thought he would say something like this in a place like this. Kale agreed with what Pyun said. Then Pyun turned in his direction and Kale took the glass and said that he would give Pyun a chance to talk. Yuma said that all the puzzles of the story begin to come together. The kingdom of Matin is a great place to keep Yuma rock magic stones. Yuma said that all they needed was to borrow the land through the Black Wolves and put up a good guard. The Matin kingdom was the only one that could withstand the Empire's multiple attacks. This kingdom was able to resist so much because a great mercenary group called the Black Wolves was created there. Yuma said that they were aggressively opposed to outsiders and hated the Empire with every fiber of their being. Yuma said that if they couldn't stand the Empire so much, it would be quite difficult for them to get in and find out about the cultivation of magic stones. Pyun smiled and awkwardly said that it would be dangerous. He asked if Yuma was sure they needed to get involved with such savages. Pyun said he couldn't just die and leave his men to starve to death. After that, we are transported to the forest, where a frightened Puna was standing in a hat with his bird. Pyun was shocked that people from the Empire came to Matin. Pyun said that this world will definitely end, and he will not see a loving wife who will warm the bed at night. Yuma and Kale turned to the frightened Pyun and said that they were with him, so he had nothing to worry about as they would protect him. Kale added that he was also an archmage. Pyun thought about it and realized that they were right. Even if they don't win, they can at least try to get out of here alive. Yuma and Kale took him by the shoulders and said that only suckers run away from battle, so they will die a brave warrior's death because they don't have a family to worry about anyway. Pyun was disappointed by this. After that, Kale said that they had just come to the right place. They looked ahead and saw a huge door with a black statue of a wolf on top. It was the lair of the black dragons, Kale said. Pyun began to worry. He asked where all the security people were talking about. After which, the bird that was sitting on the tree flew away. A sword appeared behind Yuma. Yuma said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was Malin. Malin gravely told Yuma to raise his hands and turn to face him. Yuma did as Malin said, and Malin sheathed his sword. Malin started laughing and said he must have been very scared. Malin's partner, who was behind Kale, asked why Malin was being so nice to these strangers. Malin told him he just wanted to say hello to an old friend of his. Yuma recalls how he then told them to go to the Lord and Maria and ask for protection, and Malin had told him to go to the Black Wolves. Yuma said that if he told them that you hate the Empire, they would give him a chance to pass their test. Malin hugged Yuma and said he was very happy that he was fine. Yuma recalled that before Malin's rebirth as Miro's disciple, he miraculously attracted the attention of Durin Zarka, who took him under his care. Since Malin had outstanding skills with the sword, he was like a white crow in the night circles. Yuma described how a commoner who started to become an aristocrat and was also the adopted son of the great Durkin Zarka was enough to make others want to eliminate him. Because of this, Malin was constantly being tried to kill even when he was asleep. Yuma said that a boy like Malin, who believed in the valor and honor of knights, was suddenly confronted with a harsh reality. Malin said that those who were born aristocrats did their best to get rid of a pathetic commoner like him. Malin said that all his income was spent on maintaining equipment that even theoretically could not withstand the number of fights in which he was forced to participate. Malin had told Yuma that he was right after all, and he needed to become a mercenary. Yuma looked at the adult Malin and said to himself that he had worked very hard to get here. Malin asked Yuma what he was doing here. Yuma looked in his direction and said that he wanted to ask Commander Hugo a favor. Yuma told Malin to tell Tom that an archmage, merchant, and commoner had arrived from the Empire. Malin's partner said that they weren't here to take Malin away from them, and then put his sword behind his back. My partner said Malin could guide them. Malin said that the invader had decided to meet with their commander, so they should do something about it. Malin took out his sword and told Yuma that he would help them if he could defeat him. Yuma laughed and started to draw his sword. After that, they crossed their swords and Yuma asked Malin if he really thought he could beat him after a couple of training sessions. Yuma and Malin locked eyes, and Malin parried Yuma's attack. Yuma was surprised, and Malin kicked him in the arm. Yuma threw a punch, but the man easily dodged it. Malin jumped back and noticed something was wrong. Yuma leapt at Malin to launch an attack, but Malin deftly dodged all of Malin's attacks. Malin's partner told them to be careful because there were walls nearby and it would be bad if they messed them up. Yuma and Malin ignored him and met in mid-flight. Malin was falling on top of Yuma to strike. Yuma blocked his attack, and their eyes met again. They've battered the place where they fought quite badly. Kale asked Pyun that this boy also went to him for a request. Pyun confirmed everything. Kale said they got their hands on a real golden egg. Pyun said it was too much for him. Yuma then dropped his sword to the ground. Malin stood over Yuma and pointed his sword at him. Malin stood over him and smilingly asked if Yuma would admit defeat. Yuma smilingly removed the sword blades and said that it just gave in. Malin said he was lying and told him to get up and take them to the boss. Yuma got up and asked if Malin was happy now. Malin smiled and said he'd wanted to kick Tom's ass again for a long time. Malin then turned around with a haughty face and said that the snake was no match for the dragon. They entered a long, dark corridor. Malin said he hopes they've got their balls together. Yuma didn't understand what he was talking about. Malin said that when you first saw the commander, every cell seemed to shake with fear. Yuma laughed and said it was probably the first time Malin had wet his pants. Malin turned around and said it wasn't like that, and then he started to open the door. Yuma was glad that he had finally come here. After which, they saw a person who was sitting on a throne and exuded a fearsome aura. Hugo stood up and said that the Imperial rats had recently decided to come out of their holes. In front of us is a large, muscular warrior with a spear that he used to kill an orc. His foot was on the orc's chest. This man's name was Orc Slayer Hugo, the only person on Earth who was able to defeat an orc equal in strength to a dragon in a one-on-one battle. However, before the war between dragons and demons began, a member of the Black Wolves betrayed and killed Hugo. The traitor attacked from behind and pierced Hugo's heart with a spear. Blood splattered everywhere. If he had been alive, the consequences of the war would have been much less. Hugo is sitting on a throne, legs spread wide. 3 people are kneeling in front of him: Yuma, Kale Fabian, and Pyun. Pyun bowed his head on his knees. Yuma started talking to Hugo. He began to introduce himself and his companions. Hugo's eyes lit up, and he asked Yuma if they were his people. Yuma replied that they were his comrades. Hugo replied dismissively that he couldn't believe that a commoner and the Empire's nobles could become friends. Yuma replied that it wasn't about the Empire. Hugo got angry and said, "Do you dare to cross me?" Yuma answered without fear in his eyes, "I've heard that single people don't like jokes." Pyun was already shaking with fear, and Cackly Fabian was sweating. The crowd of people got scared. Hugo chuckled and said, "You don't have the guts to stand up for your words." Hugo glared at Yuma and asked what they wanted. Yuma asked Hugo if he knew what Murax was. Hugo replied, "What do you think? I'm the local boss. The aristocrats are subordinate to the Empire, commoners to aristocrats, slaves to commoners, cattle to slaves, and below the cattle are military fugitives called Murax." Yuma looked at Hugo confidently and said that he wanted to take the Murax and buy land in the territory of Matana, because they were planning to open a dangerous business that needed to be protected. Hugo looked down at Yuma threateningly and said, "You want to use the most pathetic of the living to make money." Previously, Hugo had defeated the 5 kingdoms during the war, and it was because of him that so many Muraks appeared. Yuma looked at Hugo and said that it was better to use them than to keep them idle. Hugo looked at Hume gravely. Hugo continued to sit on the throne, his hair covering his eyes, and he told Yuma that he was acting as if he was born a warrior. Yuma bowed his head, smiled, and thanked her for the compliment. In the end, Hugo accepted Yuma's offer without any negotiations, as there is no one who would dare to go against him. Dark corridor, footsteps are heard. Yuma slammed his hand against the wall and covered his face with his hand. He exhaled. Yuma was thinking that this was scarier than he had imagined, and that damned Malin wouldn't have been able to resist meeting him. Blue sky, white clouds. Strike 2 swords together. Yuma fights Malina with swords. Malin asks if you're not leaving yet. Yuma replies, "I just got here. I want to rest for a while before heading back." Mallow says, "Let's have another sparring session then." The 3 knights look at their sparring. They were shocked. The spear goes straight for Yuma's head, but he manages to dodge, although the spear still grazed his face a little and left a scratch from which blood flowed. Yuma is furious, he is shocked. Mallow and Yuma are standing, and someone is walking towards them. This person is coming out of the shadows. The man smiles and asks if Yuma wants to spar with him. When Yuma saw this man, he recognized him. It was Cargo. Yuma fights off Cargo's spear with his sword. Cargo screams and runs to attack. Yuma is tense, fighting back again. Yuma swings his sword and punches, but Cargo, dodging. Cargo steps back a little and spins his spear behind his back with both hands. Cargo attacks. Yuma is shocked and barely repels the attack. They jump away from each other. Cargo smiles and says that Yuma's abilities impress him. Yuma replies that it is mutual. Yuma thinks Cargo is really strong, but he is definitely stronger than Hugo. So how the hell did Hugo die? Yuma says with a serious face, "Malin, we're going back and be careful with the Cargo." Malin, picking at his ear, looked at him in surprise and asked why. He seems like a good person. Yuma pounced on his brother and started biting his hair, then told Malin to be careful when he spoke to him. Yuma is worried about Malin, a pagan like that. Yuma goes along with Puen. Yuma turns his head to Poon and says that he forgot to tell him that he made another promise to Lord Hugo. Puen looked at Yuma with interest and asked him what kind of promise he had made. Yuma looked away, Nuo. Puen shouts, "What? Find a bride for Lord Hugo." From this cry, the birds were frightened and flew away. Puen is horrified, grabbing his hat and shaking, saying, "A human woman for the Lord." Yuma replies, "Isn't the Lord himself a human?" Puen says to Yuma, "Do you have any idea what might happen?" Puen imagined how Lord Hugo could hold a woman's entire head with one of his hands in order to stroke it. Puen is terrified, scared. Yuma grabs his shoulder and intimidatingly says, "If we don't find the bride, then you will be the one who will be at the mercy of his Puen hand." Puen imagined Hugo crushing his head with one of his hands. Puen shouts. A crowd of people gathered at the bulletin board. Everyone was looking at the sign that said Lord Hugo was looking for a wife. There's an announcement on the board that the Orc Slayer, Black Wolf Commander Hugo, is looking for a wife. Yuma smiles and shows the class to Puen. Yuma says that he knew the great Puen would find a way out. Puen looked bad, with a thin face and black eyes. Puen began to lose weight day after day, thinking that at some point death at the hands of the giant would overtake him. The man leaves the room. He smiles and says that he is waiting for good news. He slammed the door. Yuma and Puen are sitting at the same table together. Puen frowned and chuckled as he looked at the dossiers of applicants for the role of Lord Hugo's wife. Puen said it seems that most of the candidates are from unknown families with just the intention of getting married for the sake of power. Yuma put his hands behind his head and said, "Isn't it obvious?" Puen asks, "What are you talking about?" Yuma replies that, as Hugo's wife, there is a risk of dying during the marriage debt. High-ranking aristocrats will never risk the lives of their daughters for such a thing. That is why these people from little-known families are willing to risk their lives to give honor to their unknown family name. In other words, these girls have already come to terms with an early death. Puen looked at Yuma and said nothing. Puen decided to change the subject. He said, "By the way, the cultivation of magic stones will take about a year." Yuma replies, "Yes, why?" Puen answers with an embarrassed smile, "Well, I think my trading community will have gone bankrupt by then." Yuma wondered what. Puen started to list where the money went: bribes to Hiven Woods, bribes to the Fabian family, and regular payments to the Black Wolves. Puen cries and talks about how he has so many expenses. Yuma began to calm Puen down. Yuma said to Puen, "Don't worry so much, your excessive worry won't change anything anyway. Let's find the bride first." Puen looked askance at Hume. Puen thought to himself, He doesn't care, because I'm the only one at risk here. Yuma put his hand to his chin and thought. He frowned. Yuma thought that this was really a problem and that he needed to find an aristocrat to support Juan. Yuma wondered if he could get help from him. Yuma and Puen asked for the next candidate to enter. A girl enters the office and introduces herself as Cindy Mew. Cindy said she didn't mind becoming Hugo's wife, but she had a condition. Yuma put his hands together in a lock and rested his chin on them, and asked what is the condition. Cindy said, "Take me as your secretary." Cindy began to tell her story about how she worked at the casino run by the Fabian family. Cindy also talked about how she had to wear very revealing clothes to keep the guests happy, and Shiro would talk to me for hours about everything, his family, mistresses, money, and even his secret vault. Eventually, Shiro tried to get rid of me for knowing too much. Shiro asked Yuma, I will provide all the information about the Shiro family's secret vault, and in return, I will ask for protection from you. Pyuin thought about it. He thought that he shouldn't get involved in this. Pyuin had just started to say that it was too dangerous when Yuma interrupted him and said that Cindy was suitable for them. Pyuin got scared and shouted, Yuma, she's probably lying. Yuma didn't listen to Poon and asked Cindy what kind of security was there. Yuma said she definitely wouldn't lie to you. Hey, this woman is no ordinary pub worker. She is actually a member of the Empire's special unit, Cindy Mew. Cindy replies that she needs 5 professional swordsmen. Pyuin asked, isn't it too dangerous? Yuma realized that Cindy was studying the Puana trading community on the Empress orders. Yuma wondered if taking someone from the Empire's special squad as their secretary would help them a lot. Pyuin tried to pull Yuma out of his thoughts. Yuma grinned. It was already dark outside. Yuma was surprised. He asked Mallow and the man if they were sure they could do it together. Mallow folded his hands on his hips and smiled. Mallow said, I'm actually stronger than you think. The warrior standing next to Mallow replied, if the enemy is strong, I will defend. Yuma wondered why this guy had so many copies. Yuma, Cindy, Mallow, and the warrior crept through the tall grass at night. Suddenly the warrior said to stop. Everyone turned to look at him. The warrior asked Cindy, did you say 5? Cindy glanced toward the castle and said yes. One of the guards was standing on the castle wall. The warrior drew his bow. He drew the arrow with all his strength. Yuma, Cindy, and Mallow all looked at the war in surprise. Yuma said they weren't spears, but arrows. Mallow told him he didn't know either. The warrior launched his arrow and hit one of the guards, who died. The warrior said there are 4 left, and you'll take the rest. Cindy and Yuma were shocked. Mallow showed his class and said, nice shot, bro. Yuma grinned. He thought that Hugo wouldn't have sent Malin to his death, so he didn't have to worry. The hook was thrown over the wall. 2 security guards go. One of them says that it's too boring. One of the guards stepped forward a little. The security guard who was walking behind them started to dream that a girl would suddenly jump out in front of them, then it would be a dream job. Mallow attacked the guard behind him. He covered the man's mouth and stabbed him in the chest with his sword. The guard in front started to turn back, saying that the last girl had to be killed. Then he turned, and there was no one behind him. The guard started looking for his companion. Yuma was already behind the guard. Yuma killed him, and the guard fell. Mallow asks, are these professional swordsmen? Mallow removes the blindfold from his face. He smiles and says it was easy. Yuma also removes the blindfold and smiles. Suddenly a voice rang out, and I was wondering where the shit was coming from. Yuma and Mallow were alert. A foot came out of the darkness, and then the guard himself. He said there must be rats here. Yuma was surprised and thought, it seems that he knows how to use aura. Yuma grinned and asked, then do you want to know what these rats are capable of? The 2 swords collided with each other. The guard swung his sword and it shone because of the aura. Yuma deflected the blow. The guard was pushed back, already out of breath. The guard said, ugh, little rat, you're not bad. Yuma asked, didn't he? Yuma picked up and turned his sword. The guard was startled. He didn't have time to react. Yuma gave up the dash. He was already behind the guard. The guard fell down because Yuma dealt him fatal blows during the dash. Yuma smiled and said that the guard was a disappointment. Yuma picked up and turned his sword. The guard was startled. He didn't have time to react. Yuma gave up the dash. He was already behind the guard. The guard fell down because Yuma dealt him fatal blows during the dash. Yuma smiled and said that the guard was a disappointment. Cindy, Mallow, and the warrior were standing behind Yuma. The warrior clapped his hands and cheered. The warrior said the task was completed. Mallow asked, is that all? The entire team of 4 reached the entrance of the secret vault. Yuma asked Cindy how to open the gate. Cindy and Yuma walked up to the gate. Yuma put his hand on the gate. Cindy suggested that maybe they could just be broken down. Yuma told her that they were steel doors. The warrior shouted back to them. He drew 3 arrows at once and launched them at the gate. Yuma and Cindy were shocked. Yuma said, but those are steel doors. Mallow was also startled and asked, how did you do that, man? The warrior told Malin that when he grew up, he could do the same. Everyone logged into the vault. There was a lot of gold and money in there. Mallow was thrilled, so much money. Yuma grinned, this gold and money will be enough for him for 2 years. Yuma gives a reward to the Black Wolves. Mallow is angry, and that's it. The warrior smiled, holding a bag of money in his hand. Did the warrior say that much? Now they are riding in a carriage. Yuma thinks that one problem is already over, but there is still something left. After all, as soon as the trading community starts to grow, new problems will arise. Now we need to find someone who can support the Puana trading community. We need an aristocrat. Pyuin hands Yuma an envelope. Pyuin says this is a recommendation from Sir Haywan. You will be able to advance in the vanguard near the Yornir Plains. Yuma takes the envelope and replies, thank you. Pyuin decided to ask why Yuma was on the battlefield. Yuma smiles and says that he wants to convince Durin Zark to join them. Puna asked if Yuma had a plan, and Yuma then read all the points of his actions. The first thing he had to do was get Durin involved. The second is to gain their trust. The third is to make him your ally. Pyuin asked Yuma what the plan was. Yuma was thinking about how to get his attention. Durin was the man who became the strongest warrior during the conquest of the Empire. He was the greatest swordsman in the Empire, comparable in strength to Hugo. He was a 3rd-generation aristocrat who also received the favor of the Great Empress. Next, we are transported to the Vanguard's conquest of the plains of Yornir. Yuma came and made a recommendation. The man gave Yuma some equipment and told him that he was going to be an infantryman for the time being. Yuma was told that he was still a child. They said that this time they brought someone more interesting. "What kind?" One of the guys was standing and offered Yuma a peek into his tent, and the other was laughing. Yuma turned around and threw down his equipment and ran away. The guys stood there and didn't understand where he was going. Yuma stood there, wondering how he could get Duran's attention. After that, he realized that now was the perfect moment. Then he hit one guy until he bled. All the nearby men approached this fight. Then someone started saying that Yuma, who got the recommendation of Hive and Woods, beat up 20 knights. They didn't understand what was wrong with him. They told Yuma to prepare for a court-martial. After that, Yuma sat on his knees before the military tribunal. Duran Zark sat on the throne and told Yuma that he was recommended by Haewon himself, and he immediately decided to fight with his people. Yuma said he was sorry, and Duran laughed at what Yuma said. Duran glared at Yuma and said that he had defeated 20 of his men without a scratch and without a weapon. After which, Duran stared at Yuma and saw his bright aura. Duran said that he has a very impressive aura. Yuma was sitting up and giving off a bright blue aura. Duran smiled and scratched his beard, saying that it was very funny. The people who were beaten by Yuma were shocked that Duran liked Yuma. Duran looked and said that he needed to find out what kind of person Yuma was. Duran told the Centurion 20 strokes, and then asked him to bring Yuma to his chambers. The Centurion was shocked. He didn't understand how he could do such a thing after Duran liked him. The Centurion beat him lightly with the whip for fear of harming him, and then offered him an ointment. He bowed low to Yuma and wished him luck. After that, Duran and Yuma talked all night. After a month, when Yuma received the equipment and sword that Duran personally gave him, Yuma confidently led an army to conquer the capital of Armadas in beautiful armor. They had gathered at the castle of Armadas and were ready to start fighting. The army was ready for battle. The knights shouted fire at the archers, and they began firing at Yuma's army. Arrows flew at them, and Yuma shouted for all of them to activate their auras. The army raised their shields up, and thanks to their aura, they deflected all the arrows. The knight from the fortress said to prepare spells, after which magic projectiles flew into Yuma's army. Yuma took his sword and filled it with an aura. He deflected the projectiles and then shouted to everyone to attack. Duran stood behind and watched. Duran said Yuma was impressive. After that, they captured the fortress and took the people hostage. Duran sat in his chair and watched. After that, Yuma came to see him. Yuma said that he gave him a wonderful sword. Yuma came here to get it back. Duran smiled and said that it was indeed a good sword. He asked Yuma if he would like to keep it. Yuma looked at the Escalon sword that had belonged to Duran's first son, Demian Zark, before his rebirth. When creating the sword, it used heavy Serukan steel, which was only mined near the eastern region of Seruka, which was incredibly rare. There was nothing that Serukan steel couldn't cut or break. That was why the sword was the dream of every self-respecting warrior. 2 ferocious dragons were struck down by this sword. Yuma knew very well that he wanted this sword very badly. Duran laughed and said his expression said it all. Duran said that if Yuma wanted him so badly, he would need to become his adopted son. Yuma looked at this and said that if this was his first life, he would immediately agree. Yuma said that he would like to work for the Puana shopping community. Duran turned around and said that then he wouldn't be able to get this sword. Yuma said that if he took him on as a student, it would be much better for both of them. Duran thought about it and said that it would be much more profitable if Yuma became his adopted son. Yuma looked at him and said that he didn't want to be adopted. Duran turned away and said to himself that Yuma was a stubborn sucker. Duran smiled and said that maybe if he prepared him physically, he would change his mind about adoption. Yuma looked and agreed. Duran said he would take him on as an apprentice. Duran told Yuma to follow him as they were going to the next battle. Duran said that Yuma should prepare well this time. Duran said that the knights of the Haeseo nation would not be such weaklings, after which Duran went to the gate. Yuma looked at Duran in silence. Next, we are transported to the plains of Yornir to the military camp of the Haeseo nation. The guards noticed someone and crossed their spears, then told them to name the purpose of their visit. Duran stepped in front of them with Yuma. Yuma couldn't believe that they had personally come directly to their camp. Yuma was sure they weren't here for drinks. The guards asked what had brought them here in the middle of the war. Duran said that if Commander Chizu came to meet them personally, then let them get straight to the point. Duran offered to arrange a battle among the knights. Chizu asked Duran why he would agree to this when Duran came to them for no reason. Duran said that since he was here, he would never win this war. Duran said that the same would apply if he participated in this jousting match. After Duran said to fight, Duran said he would send a new student. Chizu agreed, but said he had one condition. He said that if they won, he would take Duran's head. Duran immediately agreed. Yuma stood there in shock. After that, Duran said that they would see each other in a week. After that, they returned to the Empire's camp. Yuma told Duran that he hadn't even considered losing his head. Duran laughed and said that there was no way he would lose his head because he would lose Yuma faster during this week, and then the night fight would not even take place in time. Yuma was surprised by this approach, and then he rushed forward. Yuma looked inside the tent and picked up his sword, then thought that Duran was just a crazy old man. He came out of the tent and saw the knights coming at him with spears. Duran told them to take the Duran told them to attack as if they wanted to kill him. The first part of the training was to learn the basics, and the second part was a real battle. Duran said that since Yuma has already learned all the basics, they go straight to real fights. Duran said that if Yuma was caught, he would run 1,000 laps around the training ground. Yuma stood there in shock and realized that it was just practically impossible. After that, the knight began to attack Yuma, but he deftly dodged. Yuma was running away from all these knights, and then he ran up to one of them and hit him on the jaw. Yuma took him by the clothes and told him that if other knights approached, he would cut off his dignity. Duran watched all this and said that he was quite good at adapting to the conditions. After that, Duran asked the guy standing next to him how he acted in this situation. The guy straightened his hair and said that it would be easier to kill a couple of them so that the others would escape. This guy was Rendell, Duran's assistant and nephew. Duran said it was nonsense to kill your allies. Rendell asked if that that wasn't the easiest way. Yuma said that if they took one step towards him, they would be in the knight's shoes. After that, Yuma jumped on Rendell and attacked him. Rendell deftly dodged, and Duran laughed and said that Rendell was an easy target. Yuma turned around and was surrounded by soldiers. Yuma knew that the easiest thing to do would be to attack their leader, so he decided to attack Rendell. Rendell loudly asked Yuma how he dared to attack his commander and promised that he would chop the yellow-faced asshole to pieces. Rendell and Yuma were in fighting crouches. The knights chanted Rendell's name loudly. RZA Chendel said he was sure Yuma had heard Rendell called before. Rendell said, "I'm not just a genius artist." Yuma was interrupted by asking the knight in diapers Rendell, which made the other wince. We are told that the genius knight Rendell is one of the most talented knights of the Zark family because he uses 2 swords in battle. Yuma thought that nothing terrible would happen because Rendell only has 1 sword right now. Yuma was wrong. Rendell used multiple stabbing attacks with his sword, and some of them were successful. Yuma realized that Rendell was strong. Yuma thought that even though he had managed to make Rendell lose his temper, his opponent's attacks were still accurate and strong. Yuma thought that if he made a wrong move, he would die. Yuma was being greedy. He could have used the war between demons and dragons as an excuse, but he probably just wanted to fight a strong opponent. Yuma's blade glistened, causing Rendell to lose his concentration, and in the same second, Yuma was already behind Rendell. Rendell said it was a shame that Yuma was able to get in the back. Rendell asked me to kill him. Yuma told Rendell that it was a good fight. Duran, who was watching this action, said that this could be the end of the training session. Duran ordered the healer to take care of Yuma's wounds. The knight replied yes. Duran told Yuma that he could have died if the attack failed and if Rendell had 2 swords. Duran said with a smile that Yuma could achieve this in 3 years if he was a student and in just 2 if he became Duran's adopted son. Yuma replied that he would probably only be able to defeat Rendell in 3 years. Yuma's bandaged shoulder received a blow from Duran's wooden sword. Duran made a sinister smile and said that Yuma didn't follow the attack because he thought he was safe. Duran said that this is because Yuma's mind controls only half of his body, and in order not to embarrass Duran, you need to control every millimeter of his body. Yuma replied that he understood, although in his mind he thought that this damn old man beats up when he wants and where he wants for the sake of training, and wondered if he should do the same. Under the cover of night, while making his way around the knights on night watch, Yuma climbed into Duran's tent. Yuma drew his sword and raised it over Duran's bed. Duran, inexplicably standing behind Yuma, asked if he was going to kill his teacher and said that every student should try to do it at least once. Yuma realized that he was in trouble. There was a commotion in the tent and one of the knights came running. Duran, who was holding a limp Yuma in his arms, asked the guard to bring Yuma to his tent since there were only 2 hours left to sleep before training. After 2 hours, the training session itself started. Duran took Yuma out into the field and said that now Yuma must go 6 days without food, to which Yuma reasonably asked if Duran wanted to kill him. Duran replied that in 6 days without food they do not die. However, he noted that given the training, anything can happen and if Yuma dies, then this is his fate. Yuma made a mental promise to kick Duran's ass when this was over. Yuma asked what kind of training they were going to have. Duran said that Yuma's task is to cover the blades of grass with an aura and count them. Along the way, Duran took off Yuma's boots. Yuma told Duran that he could barely cover his hands with aura, let alone cover the grass with it and count. Out loud, Yuma doubted the reality of these actions. Duran showed that it is still possible to do this, which Yuma was very surprised. Yuma said Duran was a tough guy. Yuma found it hard to imagine Duran's Zark fighting during the War of Dragons and Demons, and even harder to imagine the demons who killed him. On the first day of training, Yuma felt hungry for the first time in a long time. On the second day, Yuma accidentally destroyed 100 blades of grass that couldn't withstand the aura. On the third day, Yuma began to merge his mind with the world around him. On the fourth day, a herd of bulls passed by Yuma, but he never opened his eyes. On the fifth day, the endless hallucinations began and ended. On the sixth day, Yuma exhausted his energy, lying barefoot on the green grass under the falling leaves, so I came. The death of Yuma, endless, hopeless haze. In the midst of this never-ending gloom is Yuma. Yuma wonders if he died again. Why so quickly? As if falling into the unknown, Yuma reflected on how pathetic it all was. Yuma recalled that a man forced Yuma to do the impossible. Yuma thinks he's going to kill Duran. Yuma thinks about killing Duran again, but this time Yuma says the name more maliciously. Yuma began to shout, and his eyes seemed to give off a red light following the movement of the head. A dash, and now Yuma is already in the same clearing, exactly in the same place where it would seem that he died. This awakening puzzled Yuma. Near Yuma, as Duran threw out the bottle, he wondered aloud that something had worked. Yuma tells Duran that he was in the afterlife and imagined how he would kill the teacher and asks how it is. Duran smiled and said to Humo did he really think he was going to die. Duran said that he used orc blood on Yuma. Duran says there's talk of orc blood being able to grant life or death, although he honestly didn't believe it would actually work. Duran laughed a little. Yuma was a little taken aback and made a mental note to kick Duran one day. Duran said it was a great job. The whole field shone with the soft lilac grass. The clearing seemed to be filled with magical life, all modeled with colors. Yuma wondered when he had done all this. Duran said now. Yuma looked at Duran questioningly. Duran looked askance at Yuma with a malicious grin and said get ready for battle. The slightly cloudy blue sky was lit up with blue and red flags with coats of arms. A large number of knights with spears and armor were gathered in the field. Yuma and Duran stood side by side and looked at their opponents. Duran said it's been a week. Duran asked if Kyle had chosen the right fighter. Kyle said Duran should take care of himself. Kyle added that thanks to the kid, Durin's head will fall off his shoulders. Durin laughed at these words and said that we will see. The knight with the scroll in his hands loudly said that no one should interfere in the battle between knights and that the loser admits defeat and surrenders. Yuma was standing with a sword in his hands in front of a warrior with twin battle axes. The knight with the scroll continues to speak loudly. Now he says that if Sir Kyle loses, Durin and his troops will be escorted to the Heiseo nation. The knight says that if Sir Durin loses, Durin will accept any condition from the Heiseo nation. The knight with the scroll began to introduce the contestants. Knight said the representative of Sir Durin's side, the Knight of Hume. Yuma was standing there thinking that this was his first time wearing such good armor. The knight shouted that the representative of the Heiseo nation is the snowfield destroyer immortal Tensu. Tensu stood tensely with his axe slung over his shoulder. Yuma peered at Tenza. Yuma remembered what he had heard about Tensu. Humo strains your memory. There are 3 well-known families in the empire. The Zark family of skilled swordsmen, the Fabian family of magicians, the Ralmandi family of spearmen. Once the paths of Tensu and the spearman Chunin Rolmandi crossed, and on the day of the fight, Chunin returned home barely alive. Tensu angrily asked if young Yuma was his rival. Tensu said it was disrespectful. Raising the axe over his head, Tensu said that he would not give in anyway and hit the ground with the axe. The impact of the axe caused a web of cracks to form on the ground and sent rocks flying in all directions. Tensu's eyes seemed to shine. Holding the axe out to the side, Yumu Tensu shouted that it was coming. With a jerk, Tensu heads towards Yuma. Yuma took up a defensive stance, raising his sword in front of him. The eyes of the opponents glittered with anger. Tensu was near Yuma and was about to launch an attack with his axes. Yuma's leap. The glint of a sword. The Tensu has fallen. Birds flew out of the trees, startled by the sounds of battle. Durin's knights and Kyle were shocked by the outcome so quickly. Duran was pleased. Kyle the bastard shouted. Kyle loudly asked Yuma what cheap tricks Yuma used. As Kyle spoke, he drew his sword from its scabbard and moved towards Yuma. Kyle shouted that his brother would never lose to such a brat. Yuma glared at Kyle. Yuma asked if the older brother Kyle was desecrating the death of his younger brother. Kyle looked at Yuma with a startled expression. Durin moved to stand next to Yuma and glared at Kyle. Yuma told Kyle to give up the sword if he didn't want to see the Heiseo nation fall for himself. The war was stopped with a single stroke of the sword, and thousands of husbands were able to return to their families. Kyle started to cry and bit his lip in anger and frustration. A seemingly happy ending, it would seem. The news quickly spread throughout the empire. Neral chewed and joyfully greeted the troops. The empress was praising Durin. At that moment, Yuma was beside Durin, kneeling in front of the empress. Palace banquet. Many elegant ladies and gentlemen gathered. Yuma was standing on the balcony by the railing. Yuma thought about how long it had been since he had held onto that railing and ran his hand along it. Yuma thought that before his rebirth, this place was almost his home and that it was strange for him to receive invitations to the palace now. While sipping wine from a glass, Yuma noticed that someone was approaching him from the side. A girl asked if it was Yuma. Yuma couldn't believe what he was seeing. Hale said he wanted to ask Yuma something. With a slightly surprised look, Yuma replied, "Of course, mistress, ask." Hale asked if Durin had actually given Yuma orc blood to drink. Humo lowered his head and replied that yes, that Durin did it for the sake of salvation. Hale said clearly that she would ask Durin about it. Hala asked Yuma why he asked for orc blood from her mother again. Yuma's face became more serious. Yuma recalled his conversation with the Empress. The Empress said that Yuma had made a great contribution and asked what he wanted as a reward. Yuma, sitting on his knees, raised his head and said that he wanted the blood of an orc as a reward. Yuma thought at that moment that he wanted to give the orc's blood to Kale Fabian for research. From her memories, Yuma brought out Hale, who viciously said that the blood of an orc could buy a small state. Completely losing her temper, Hale asked Yuma why he needed something like this and said that she would not allow Yuma to use this blood for profit. Yuma said to himself that Hyla is the one who saved him more than once but also the one who caused his death. Yuma continued to remember something with an air of complete calm. In his mind, Yuma called Hyla his former mistress. Hale asked Yuma why he was standing there with a smile on his face. With a worried look, Hale squeezed the hem of her dress and asked if Yuma thought she was joking. Yuma thought to himself that Hale still had a childish charm. Yuma replied to Hale that the orc blood would help with Kale Fabian's research. Yuma started telling Hale that Yuma's parents were killed by a magic attack and that after it happened, Yuma was saved by Mr. Kale. Yuma was interrupted by some girl from the side who said that somewhere she had already heard this story. The girl asked Yuma if he was sure that it was Kale who saved his village. Next to this girl was Adeline Woods with a sad face. Yuma turned around in the direction of the girls and mentally said that they were mocking him. Hala looked at Dushka, and her sister turned to her and asked if she knew Yumo. Hala's sister ignored the question and continued talking to Yumo. The girl told Yumo that first of all the savior was Lady Adeline and not Mr. Kale, and that it seems that Yumo was saved more than once. Hale asked her sister again if she knew Yumo. Again, the girl didn't respond to Hala's question. The girl asked Yumo if he had become Durin's apprentice and if that was why Yumo was so dismissive of others. Adeline was looking at the girl with some concern. Unable to stand the rudeness towards herself, Hyla approached the girl and said that the power of the imperial family seems to be worthless to the girl. Hyla raised her voice and asked the girl how dare she ignore the second princess in front of a commoner. Hala said she didn't think even her mother would do that. Yuma watched the argument and felt like a tiny shrimp near a killer whale fight. Yuma thought that this is how an outsider feels when the powerful are fighting. Yuma thought about stopping them. Yuma called the first princess and the second second princess. Yuma said that he never lied about what he said before. Yuma continued and said that it was true that both Adeline and Kale had saved his life in different villages and under different circumstances. The princesses looked at Yuma. Yuma thought that judging by the first princess' face, she didn't believe him. Yuma asked the first and second princesses if they could share a glass with the savior Adeline. The first princess said with a sly grin that she would probably also like to have a drink with a war hero. The first princess asked Yuma if he would mind. Yuma bowed down and said that it would be an honor for him. Yuma found himself on the first floor, near a large number of corked wine barrels. From the balcony, the first princess loudly declared that she now wanted Yuma to drink all the wine in those barrels until she finished drinking her glass of wine. Hyla can't tell if the first princess is going too far, even if it's just for fun. Yuma easily uncorked one of the barrels and thought about how the first princess could have found out that he was a heavy drinker. A certain amount of time passed, and the barrels of wine were mercilessly consumed by Yuma. The first princess wasn't happy about it. The servants said that she seemed to have fallen into her own trap and that if they were the princess, they would regret such a bad decision. Quickly finishing her glass, the first princess shouted enough. The princess said that it was less entertaining than she had imagined and that she was sorry to see the wine wasted. The princess said that Yuma was a good drinker and asked him what the wine tasted like. After wiping the drops of wine from his lips, Yuma answered perfectly. The first princess said it was wonderful. Speaking to the entire audience, the princess said that there were so many spectators here and they would get bored if they left it at that. The princess told Durin's apprentice that he was able to kill Tenza with a single blow and no one would mind fighting him. Hayla shouted to her sister that the boy had just drunk 5 barrels of wine and why force him to fight. The first princess replied that people might start thinking that the boy had received Hayla's favor if she continued to say so. The first princess asked her mother what she thought. Her mother waved her hand and told her that the first princess should do as she wished. The first princess turned to Hale and said that even mother had given her permission and it would be better not to contradict her.